Hello and welcome. Thank you all for being with us. My name is Jasmine Waddell. I'm the class of '99, and excited to do my 20th anniversary, almost as much as I'm excited about this. So I'm the chair of the Pembroke Center Associates, a group of alumni and friends who support the Pembroke Center's work. We are thrilled to welcome all of you, students, family, alumni, faculty, and friends, to the Pembroke Center's annual Student Prize and Grant presentations. What we're going to experience today invigorates the work that we do, and we're all very proud to be here, and we're excited to celebrate you. The Pembroke Center was founded in 1981. It was named in honor of Pembroke College of Brown University and the women of Pembroke and its predecessor, the Women's College. The center's research and teaching explore social change and how questions of difference, such as gender, race, class, and religion, affect our thinking and our world. The Pembroke Center is home to Brown's Gender and Sexuality Studies concentration and supports students and scholars such as this great group of people who we are all honored to have here today with fellowships, prizes, and research grants. The Pembroke Center archives preserve the history of Brown and Rhode Island women and intellectual history of feminist scholars. Before we get started, I would ask you to please turn off your cell phones. You won't want to deal with that once these scholars start opening their mouths. And let's take a few minutes now to go around the room and for everyone to introduce themselves. I think it's important for us to know who's here. So perhaps if you, yeah.
I'm I've been a member of the Pembroke Center Associates Council for many years, and I come from Massachusetts, and I'm a retired lawyer and educator.
I'm class of '66, former chair of the Pembroke Center Associates, and kicked upstairs, permanently vice chair. I used to work on, I'm also a lawyer, I used to work on Wall Street, and now I spend the day lying on the couch, drinking coffee and reading trashy novels. And for some reason, everybody always laughs when I say, what do you think I was doing before I came here?
Carol Limline, class of '67. I too have been on the Associates Council for some years, and we from Southern California, where I live, initiated the Live and Pay undergraduate research grant. In my retired life, so-called retired life, I am also head of the Historic Preservation Organization in Santa Monica.
I'm Nancy Buck, class of '65. I'm a retired lawyer, and I also read trashy novels. That's right.
Anita Spivey, class of '74, back for my 45th class reunion. Long-standing member of the council and live in South Florida, so, you know, it's cold here.
Do you need a mic?
I don't think so.
Can everybody hear?
Okay. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yep.
I'm Drew Walker. I'm the Associate Director of the Pembroke Center and Director of Gender and Sexuality Studies.
I'm Mary Murphy, and I'm the Nancy L. Bach 65 Pembroke Center archivist.
I'm Julia Kiley. I'm the Communications Manager at the Center.
Suzanne Stewart-Steinberg, Director of the Pembroke Center and Parent 2019.
I'm Pamela Foa. I'm a retired federal prosecutor, but I'm here as a senior fellow at the Pembroke Center doing research on feminist issues. I read trashy novels. A lot of trashy novels.
I'm Victoria Westhead, and I'm also a member of the Pembroke Center Associates Council, and class of '83, and I also have some graduating this year I'm very excited about. And excited. Anyway, really looking forward to this afternoon.
I'm Emily Sullivan, class of '99, also here for my 20th reunion. And I'm also a member of the Associates Council for 9 or 10 years now. And I'm very happy to be here. I'm excited.
I'm Donna Goodnow, a Pembroke Center manager, parent class of '07.
I'm Mi Tran, and I'm a concentrator in gender and sexuality studies, and I'll be the first to present.
Introduce yourself.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Mary Albert. I'm also a senior concentrator in gender and sexuality studies, and will also be presenting today. It's great to be here.
Hi, I'm Caroline Mulligan. I am a senior concentrating in English nonfiction writing and history, and I too will be presenting.
Since I'm at this table, my name is Diane Straker. I'm an administrative assistant here at the Pembroke Center.
Hi, my name is Hango. I'm Michan mom. I come from Vietnam, and I'm very happy to be here to see you today. Thank you.
My name is Hai Chan, Michan father. I took almost 24-hour flight from Vietnam to here today. Yeah, actually I'm electrical engineer, so I'm not familiar with what my daughter presenting today, and even to see her friends to talk about. Actually I'm the utility engineer, so it's not familiar with me, but I'm very happy to be here. Thank you.
My name is Rebecca Liho, and I am new to the advancement team and excited to be here.
Hi, I'm Darcy Pinkerton. I'm class of 2014, and I'm a development officer working closely with the Pembroke Center.
I'm Jean Howard, professor of English literature. I'm Debbie Weinstein. I was formerly the associate director of the Pembroke Center. Delighted to be here. I'm here now, though, because I was the proud thesis advisor for Andy Pham, who's presenting today.
I'm Andy Pham. I'm a senior concentrator in gender and sexuality studies, and yeah, I'll be presenting too.
Hello, my name is Julie Nguyen, proud mom of Andy Pham. I'm so honored to be here to celebrate everyone's your success, and true honor to be here. Thank you for having me.
Joe McMaster, class of 1960, longtime council member.
Donna Zaccaro, council member for just a year now, class of '83 with Victoria and Gwen, and parent of a graduate this weekend.
I'm Martha Hamblett, and I'm Programs and Stewardship Coordinator at Pembroke Center, and I'm a parent class of 17.
I'm Gwen Masterman with little laryngitis, and I'm class of '83, parent of a daughter of 13, and been a council member for a long time.
I'm Lori, and I'm here to support my daughter Sophie.
Dylan Polking, class of 17.
Hi, I'm Sophie. We were going to do a collective introduction, but then decided to do it individually, which was the hesitancy.
Because that was the plan.
Yeah. I graduated in 2019.5, studying history. Thank you for the award.
My name is Dan Kupets, and I'm Sophie's father, and very excited to be here.
I'm Zoe. I just finished my first year at Brown, and I'm Sophie's sister.
I'm
I'm Lucy. I'm graduating this weekend, but from a different department. I'm here to enjoy your presentations and drink your coffee.
Good morning. My name is Lisa Lee, and I'm part of the Sophie Kupets Booster Club.
Hi, I'm Tali Ginsberg, class of 2018.5, and I'm just a friend.
My name is Nick John Ramos. I'm the Mellon Postdoctoral Fellow of Race and Science and Medicine, and I am here to support both Alex, who is my honors thesis student, and Andy, who also I served as an honors advisor.
Hi, my name is Alex Burnett. I'm a senior concentrating in history and gender and sexuality studies, and I will be presenting today.
And I'm James Burnett, and I'm here to support Alex.
Hi, I'm Francesca Alison. I'm from Madagascar. I'm a transfer student concentrating in psychology and organizational change, and I'll be presenting soon.
Hello everyone, my name is Carlos Montesinos from Alexandria, Virginia. I came here to support Francesca, and looking forward to hear all the speakers today.
Right now. So now I'm going to hand the podium over to Drew Walker, the Associate Director of the Pembroke Center and the Director of the Gender and Sexuality Studies concentration, and he will be the master of ceremonies for the presentations.
Okay, I will echo Jasmine's words and say that it's always a pleasure to recognize great student work and to have the opportunity to hear them speak about it. So it's a pleasure to introduce our student prize winners and grant recipients today and welcome them, and congratulations on all of your accomplishments, including your impending graduation in 2 days. I would like to start with a few words of thanks. First, to all those who have supported these students, their professors, the university, and their friends, families, and other supporters. A special thanks goes to their advisors who guided them through their research projects. Second, to the Associates Council whose support and generosity makes possible so much of what we do at the Pembroke Center, including giving these grants and prizes. Third, I'd like to thank my Pembroke colleagues who assisted in the process of selecting these students and who coordinated today's events. Donna Goodnow, who administers the entire process from application to processing the awards. Martha Hamblett, Diane Straker, Jillian Kiley, and our director, Suzanne Stewart-Steinberg, and our archivist, Mary Murphy. And a special thanks to Denise Davis, who serves on all of the awards committees. She's not able to be here today. This year, as in years past, we received a robust and impressive group of applications and nominations for these grants and awards, and it's always a wonderful challenge to make the selections. We're very proud of the work of this year's recipients and the ways they embody the mission and values of the Pembroke Center and Gender and Sexuality Studies. Now, before turning it over to today's speakers, I'd like to note that one of the recipients of one of the Enid Wilson Undergraduate Travel Fellowships was not able to be here today. Makeda Hughes received funding for her thesis, MAUVE 2010, a translational exploration of the linguistic constructions of blackness. And finally, though, at this event we hear from our undergraduate award and grant recipients, I'd also like to announce that Shamara Al-Hassan is the winner of this year's Marie J. Langlois Dissertation Prize for Outstanding Dissertation in Feminist Studies. Shamara will be receiving her PhD in Africana Studies this weekend, and her dissertation is entitled Rastafari Women's Intellectual History and Activism in the Pan-African World. So I want to mention those just again to give you an even broader scope of the kinds of work that's being done with the Pembroke Center's support. So with that, I'm going to introduce each speaker individually just before their presentations, and they are going to go in the order that it appears on the slide. So I'll turn it over to our first presenter, Mee Tran, winner of this year's Joan Wallach Scott's Prize for Best Honors Thesis in Gender and Sexuality Studies.
Am I audible? Hopefully? Okay. Okay, I'll talk louder too. Hello. I would like to begin by thanking my thesis advisors, Michael Stewart and Monica Della Torre. and the Pembroke Center Associates for your generosity, and my parents who just arrived in Providence, and my close and lovely friend AC, who's here today too. So my thesis is a manuscript that reorganizes fragments within queer narratives, namely An Imaginary Affair with Emily Dickinson. Here, fragments gesture to the marginal, the queer, animal, madness, and nonsense, the part human, subhuman, non-human subjects, whose voices have historically been made to dissolve, decay, disappear. This project foregrounds language fragmentation as a tool for meaning-making in the wake of ongoing loss. Ruptures work to produce polyphony where it seems silence has taken over. Here, I am grappling with how to make sense of my queerness and Vietnamese identity, where queer and race politics are not articulable in Vietnamese. How to write within the English index using Vietnamese tones, how to work with a language that offers meaning and erases it. So I'm going to read you a bit from the beginning of the manuscript. In the summer of 1883, Emily Dickinson sent Nellie Swetzer a bouquet of flowers. In it, a list of ingredients for a big black cake. 2 pounds of flour, 2 pounds of sugar, ½ pound of molasses, 1/2 pint of brandy, 5 pounds of raisins, 3 pounds of currant, citrons, 19 eggs, 4 nutmegs, clove, mace, cinnamon, and 2 pounds of butter. Yeah, it's really impressive. Dickinson was known more for her gardening than poetry. She was a botanist above all. She collected flowers, pressed, and meticulously labeled each. This collection of some 400 flowers is too fragile to be handled, so it must be precious. It's now archived on the Harvard website. We can flip through the entire herbarium without ever touching the book. This is the funny thing about reading Dickinson in the digital age. Immortal little pieces of her swims across Massachusetts, fragments assembled, archived, then reassembled. There is an ED International Society holding conferences within and without the US every year, yet for most of her life, Dickinson stayed indoor. A recluse, not much is known of Dickinson. There are plenty of strange speculations. What we do know, she wrote a lot about volcanoes and bees. Of the best speculations, this meant she was gay. I hold this as a fact. Dickinson fanatics can tell you a lot of facts about her. Some scholars will tell you that her fragments were journal entries, logs of a daily life filling the cracks of her domestic life. The girl you're seeing will tell you about the black cake, and if she bakes and writes poetry, you will begin to think you're seeing Emily. Like Dickinson, she is elusive, disappearing one day. So what remains? The fact of the black cake. Excessive, way too big for a domestic oven. This is ironic because Dickinson's poems are tight-lipped. They arrest little moments, some so small they fit on the flap of an envelope. Here's the envelope. Oops. In this short life that only lasts an hour, merely how much, how little is within our power. Difficult to know what she meant here. The adverbial value of how is twofold, one as a question and two as a matter of fact. How much and how little are both folded within this hour, or perhaps she is weighing between them, lifting to see what's compressed in time. Something feels heavier about an hour. I wonder if this is what Deleuze meant when he says, since each of us was several, there was already quite a crowd. Let us examine the crowd. 1. A single daguerreotype remains of her image. 1. Taken while she was at Mount Holyoke for less than a year. 1. Her only sister is named Lavinia. 1. Her only brother is named Austin. 1. Her only surviving article of clothing is a white cotton dress. 1. She had a sister-in-law named Susan Gilbert. 1. A father named Edward Dickinson. 1. A mother named Emily. 1. A dog named Carlo. How to recover lost shapes, or at least make sense of the shapes we have. This is complicated as Deleuze says, nonsense changes shapes. Grammatically, shape is both the quality and the noun. Does nonsense shape, or does it metamorphose? Words are tight-lipped. I want to shake the verb. Shake so the surface cracks open like a green fruit. But my shaking does no more than repeat the shape in space. If instead, suppose I shake the fruit in a bit of flour and eggs and 2 pounds of butter, I might arrive at something like a fruitcake. Antonin Artaud. He knows how to break language, that Artaud. Ratara, 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 atara, tatara, rana, atara, atara, katara. I want to feed him an egg, a few flaps of Dickinson's poem, maybe the entirety of her flower manual. Here, eat some nonsense. I suppose that's the danger in letting people handle the herbarium. Someone will always try to eat the pages. As Simone Weil says, the great sorrow of human life is knowing that to look and to eat are two different operations. To read as to eat. Here, have a cake. Hello, I'm back. Sure, I'll stay here for 2 more years to do the MFA program, so yeah, that's what I'll be doing. Yeah. No, I should have, it's really close. But I did look, yeah, exactly. I did look at a lot of her online archival materials, a lot of fascicles and things like that. Yeah.
Did it make you want to see the original?
Oh, definitely. There are some artworks that's been made of her work that are available in the Hay archive, which I got to see those, but not her actual piece, unfortunately. Yeah. Oh. Oh, yes. I think there's a lot of flattening when I write in English, but it goes together in the sense that I'm really focused on the musicality of the text and how it sounds, and the process was a lot of reading out loud to myself, and with a lot of poems, I'll read them out loud. So that's one of the steps. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Okay, next up will be Francesca Alison, a recipient of the Linda Pay Undergraduate Research Grant. Does anybody see the cursor?
This one.
But where's the cursor?
Oh, exit maybe? Escape? Oh, we're stuck.
Oh, there it is. I found it.
Okay.
It was just the cursor disappeared. But got it.
Okay. Hi again. My name is Francesca Alison. I am originally from Madagascar. I'm a RU transfer student from the Northern Virginia Community College, and I am concentrating in psychology and organizational change. So first of all, I wanted to say thank you to all of you for being here today, for having me. Thank you for the Pembroke Center Associate for their generosity, for allowing me to pursue my project. And thank you for my friend for being here to support me. So my project is called Umena. Umena is a pun in my Malagasy language. Umena is give, provide, and mena is red. So in this context, it means providing tools, education to students so that they can spot red flags ahead of time. And red flags being the signs that someone is in an unhealthy relationship. And the goal is to reduce and prevent abuse in Madagascar. Just a little bit of background about myself and on how I came about with my project. Back in Madagascar, the only form of abuse that I could recognize was only physical abuse. It was only when I came here in America 5 years ago that I got trained as a sexual assault peer educator on my previous campus that I learned about the other forms of abuse, that I learned about consent, that I learned about healthy relationship, that I learned about domestic violence. And it was such an eye-opener for me because that's when I realized that back home I was in an emotionally and psychologically abusive relationship, but due to a lack of education on the subject, I didn't know better, so I couldn't do better. So I started to do my research, and I found out that I was not the only one, that 65% of women reported being in a physically abusive relationship. And based on the research, this number is more likely to be higher because people are less likely to report. And based on the research, a physical abuse starts usually with the emotional and psychologically abusive relationship before it gradually turns into a physical abusive relationship. So I was like, I need to do something, but what? So I've been working on creating an educational platform for students aged 6 to 12, teaching them about healthy relationship, about consent, about emotional awareness, about body safety. And I wanted the program to be as interactive and also to be as games and also through videos and books, because it's for children. And those are the points that I want to tackle. And my goal is to provide students with the tools so that they can stand up for themselves and choose to live healthy relationship and break the cycle of abuse. And my ultimate goal is to have the program be part of the educational system in my country. So thanks to the grant, I got to go back to my country last December, and I got to talk to the mayor in my country, and I exposed my project, and he was really excited about it. And he told me, we talked about feasibility, and he told me that we could run first the project as a, what is it called again? Oh my gosh. On the district first as a, yes, thank you. And then if it works in the district, go to the educational Ministry of Education and try to scale it if it works. So I'm really excited because right now I'm working with a lot of faculty members at Brown and with alums at Brown, with on and off-campus mentors as well. And this summer I'm going to be part of the B-Lab, working with the Nelson Center of Entrepreneurship, and going to San Francisco working with the social emotional learning. They're going to help me with the curriculum, and I'm excited. Thank you again for your time. Thank you for having me. Thank you for believing in me, for allowing me to make a difference in my community. Yes.
My father taught for many years at Northern Virginia Community College, so I'm very happy to welcome you here.
Thank you so much.
Any questions? Francesca?
So, thank you. It's a very impressive story all the way around. Oh, sorry. Excuse me. This is a very impressive story all the way around.
Thank you.
And I'm deeply inspired. I'm curious, one of the things that I know about Madagascar is that there's a very extensive Peace Corps network there. I can imagine that there are a lot of pockets of expats. I'm curious how you're thinking about maybe engaging with the expat community in Madagascar, whether or not that would be valuable, or if that's something that you think would not be valuable because it would be more impactful for it to be coming from citizens.
Yeah, I talked to that with some of the people in my country, and I feel like it's gonna be more impactful in a way to have the people in the country deliver the message, and also just culture and yeah. But of course, maybe later having the help of anybody would be awesome. Thank you. Yes?
Will the resources and the curriculum they created will be available for maybe education or other third world countries to use that? Will you make it available for?
Yeah, of course, if it works, I will. So I'm like in the process of trying to translate too, and I think that's the challenge, because trying to make it appropriate to the population first, and trying it out, and if it works, then of course I'm happy to give back. Okay? Yes?
Will you also be involving the kids' parents? Do they have kids' parents having a part in the curriculum?
Yes.
Because how
Yeah.
they're seeing abuse,
I think
abuse, and how are they supposed to?
I'm working on it, thinking about it, because I feel like it's harder to have parents engaged, but since students, they are at school, so that's more something we can control. But people, parents, I'm thinking about it, but making that happen is another level of, yes. Thank you.
Okay. Our next presenters are recipients of, and they'll be individual, but they're recipients of the Enid Wilson Undergraduate Travel Fellowships. The first is Caroline Mulligan with her project Land Dyke Legacies.
Hi. So I'd like to begin by thanking my thesis advisors, Professor Kate Shapira, Professor Kelly Colvin, and Professor Catherine Imbriglio. And I would also like to thank the associates for your generosity that allowed me to enhance this project. So for my honors thesis in English nonfiction writing, I wrote about the past, present, and future of the lesbian land movement, an outgrowth of second-wave feminism, when women, predominantly lesbians, developed woman-only land collectives across the U.S. I was particularly interested in how or if these sites can function as spaces of intergenerational connection at a moment when older and younger lesbians often have very different conceptions of gender and sexuality. So with the generosity of the Enid Wilson Travel Fellowship, I was able to visit Huntington Open Woman's Land, which is in Huntington, Vermont, and which is the only remaining women's land collective in New England. So the segment that I'm going to read to you all today is from my first night at Howl, which is Huntington Open Women's Land, Howl, that's a pun. So this was from when I first saw the land one evening in February, and when I met the caretaker, Anya, and her partner, Lisa. Anya and I troop outside to the frigid February night. Howl owns 50 acres, abutting a state park, but tonight Anya shows me just the immediate grounds beyond the house. An open field stretches out before the trees. In the past, Howl has allowed their neighbors to graze horses here. They've also had arrangements with farmers to let them use the land, partnerships that benefit them as well as the farmers, because of a Vermont policy offering relief on property taxes for locations in agricultural use. Tonight, there's just snow. Anya points out the empty chicken coop in the outhouse. Thankfully, Howl does in fact have a septic system allowing for indoor plumbing. There's a memorial garden for people important to Howl residents, statuettes sticking out from the snow at odd angles. A pond dug by Howl members years ago lies beyond the trees, just big enough for Lisa and Anya to shoot a hockey puck on when it freezes over. Anya also mentions a labyrinth made of stones laid in the ground. There are some women who come just for that, she says. Right now, I'm the only guest at Howl, but when the weather is nicer, there are more women, more being a relative term, who make the trip up here to camp or otherwise enjoy the isolation. Back inside, I plan to retreat to my room for dinner, but Anya invites me to join her and Lisa. It's nice to have visitors for Shabbat, she tells me, asking if I'm okay with them praying out loud. After the blessing, we spend more time talking than eating. Our conversation jumps from topic to topic, most related at least tangentially to why I'm at Howl. We talk about the feeling of a vanishing lesbian identity. Perhaps unsurprisingly, the discussion turns to what being a woman means. I'm told a story about a non-binary friend of Anya's who, upon coming out, asked if they were still welcome at Howl. Howl's policy is that anyone who is comfortable identifying with womanhood is allowed on the land, an assertion that hasn't been without challenges from former Howl supporters. Will this policy be enough to keep women, and those who identify partially with womanhood, coming out to the land? Lisa is pansexual, not a lesbian, but she has spent extensive time on woman's land. In the 1990s, she spent several years living on one in the Southwest, sleeping outside on a 1-foot platform, which somehow always felt secure enough to keep away the mice and snakes. The mention of snakes launches her into another story about her time there. I was the official rattlesnake wrangler, she explains, laughing. Whenever a rattlesnake wandered into someone's dwelling, Lisa was called to take care of it. She'd use a pole to scoop it up and toss it in a barrel held by another woman. Then they'd take it away, several miles at least, and set it free, perfectly embodying the ways that many women's lands were focused on living harmoniously with nature. More serious, Lisa says of her time in the Southwest, "I didn't think I was doing anything special." She describes being part of the women's land movement as being swept up in a wave, so deeply invested in creating community that she never thought about how exceptional her actions were. If the movement then was like a wave, perhaps now it's a pond, like the one that lies in Howell's woods. Small and woman-made, easy to miss, but undeniably there, a part of the landscape that seems so natural that it might as well have always existed. Not exactly growing, but changing with the seasons. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you for that. I know nothing about this movement. So how big was it? And what was the philosophy of those who started it? And how did they get the land? I'm interested in the history of this.
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of my project focused around a directory that was published of woman's land, and it was published 1995-96. At that point, it listed about 50 women's lands that were in existence across the United States. Also at that point, it was already kind of late in the movement. I've heard that in the 80s, there were like as many as over 100 collectives across the United States. It's difficult to find documentation because a lot of them were small. Some of them were just like the private homes in like a few acres that women owned. So unfortunately, the archival material that relates to them is very limited. But they were scattered across rural America. It's difficult to get a count on how many there are today. Howell is the only remaining one in New England, as I said. There are several in Arkansas. South Oregon also has a pretty strong network of like 5 or 6 different collectives. And then there are various ones that are just kind of here and there. A lot of them are agriculturally focused. There are a couple I talk about that are just like organic farms, and that was how they got their income. Occasionally it would be women who were like independently wealthy or who inherited land. A lot of times there would be like cottage industries, so just like crafts, knitting, various forms of bringing in income. Yes.
Just following up on that question, because I also haven't heard about that. It's interesting. So are they very independent then? It sounds like they're very independent, though they may have come from a shared idea. They don't interconnect or communicate with each other particularly.
It kind of depends on the land as well as sort of when you're talking about. So as I mentioned, there was a directory, a guide to different lands that was published starting in 1995. Prior to that, in 1984, I believe, a woman named Joyce Cheney published a directory of women's lands. There were also newsletters and magazines, one which is relatively well archived called Maze, which was basically like a newsletter where women who were in these different spaces would write in and write about their experience. So although they were separated by distance, and some were more private than others, there was some sense of shared identity.
You touched on something that I have thought about a lot, which is kind of the change making lesbian identity or identification. My mom's a lesbian, and so you were talking about like women's land. It's like, oh my gosh. I was wondering if you could just draw out a little bit how that kind of change came out in your piece and how you can explore that.
Yeah, I mean, there are a couple of different ways of looking at that. So one that I do explore a bit in my piece is how a lot of times among younger folks, there's more of a push to identify just as queer, which is totally fine. I think there are a lot of benefits to reclaiming that as a label and to identifying with it. But there are fewer spaces that are woman only. There aren't a lot of bars left. There aren't a lot of bookstores, which I sort of touch on tangentially here. But the loss of that physical space definitely limits sort of the different connections that can be made across generations in a way that makes thinking about a sustained identity really difficult. There are also a lot of questions about gender, about what it means to be a woman or a lesbian. I talk a decent amount in my thesis about trans identities as well. As I mentioned, Howl is very welcoming to trans folks, to non-binary people. Unfortunately, not all the women's lands are. So there are a lot of questions in that regard as well, to put it mildly. Thank you.
Okay. Our next presenter is Andy Pham, who is also a recipient of the Enid Wilson Undergraduate Travel Fellowship.
Hello, welcome and thank you for coming. So my name is Andy Pham. I'm a senior concentrating in ethnic studies and gender and sexuality studies. And then today I have the honor of presenting some of my thesis project, which is titled Reconfiguring Dirty Bodies, Early AIDS, Melodramas, and the Work of Remembering and Reimagining. When I'm nervous, I have a tendency to speak really fast, so if I start doing that, you can raise your hand and I'll slow. Okay, sorry, already. Okay, I'll go slower. So to begin, I would like to thank some folks. I won't read every name just for time, but I would like to start by thanking Professor Weinstein and Professor Ramos, who are my two very patient, insightful, and compassionate thesis committee members. I would like to thank the Pembroke Center's Enid Wilson Undergraduate Travel Fellowship, and then the Pembroke Center Associates, and then my mom, who's here with me today. Thank you. So here's an overview of my thesis project, and for this presentation, I'll be focusing entirely on the work and the lessons I gained from writing my second chapter in Pure Performances. So my second chapter is informed entirely by my travel to the AIDS activist videotape collection at the New York Public Library, which the generosity of the Pembroke Center helped get me there for that 1 week in January. I wanted to start by, I would like to begin by reading a portion of my thesis that, someone's calling me, sorry. A portion of my thesis that discusses how I felt not finding as many women of color and queer people of color in this collection. So, through troubling my desire for the militant queer of color elder, I also remembered Toni Morrison's message in Strangers. As I set out to understand this phenomenon of sociocultural dirtiness, I simultaneously yearned to uncover a queer of color lineage in which I can insert myself. I desired non-white trans grandparents, lesbian aunts, gay uncles, bisexual godparents, and a generally queer of color ancestry. Even in my description of early AIDS activists, both living and past, as elders, I subconsciously attempt to make claim to the wisdoms they presumably hold/held. Feeling as though a heteropatriarchal white supremacist world is what robs me of opportunities for such wisdoms to be transmitted in person. Apparent in my longing for a radical lineage is a desire to better understand myself through others via gestures of ownership, an idea that Morrison discusses. Morrison writes, "It took some time for me to understand my unreasonable claims on that fisherwoman, to understand that I was longing for and missing some aspect of myself, and that there are no strangers. There are only versions of ourselves, many of which we have not embraced, and then most of which we wish to protect ourselves from. For the stranger is not foreign, she is random, not alien, but remembered. And it is the randomness of the encounter with our already known, although unacknowledged selves, that summons a ripple of alarm. It is also what makes us want to own, govern, administrate the other, to romance her if we can, back into our own mirrors. In either instance, of alarm or false reverence, we deny her personhood, the specific individuality we insist upon for ourselves." And then back to my writing. "And although I hold similar social identities and can feel this anger, laughter, tears, and embraces I witnessed resonate with me, the early AIDS activists I saw and listened to are still the other. Temporally and spatially separated, my access to the versions of these activists at the time of recording is limited to the videotape collection. I hope that my reconciliations with the intrinsic limitations of this archive and my awareness of my urge to claim early AIDS activists as part of my own self-making allow me to cultivate compassion, curiosity, and caution in my approach. And I think that explicating my emotional and political investment in my work, especially when it will concern full, complex people, is important to do prior to my analytical undertaking." And so just discussing that a little bit, in performing a kissin and in immortalizing it through video documentation, I interpret the kissin's unique political power as resting on the ways in which the demonstration collected and repurposed the very discursive dirtiness mapped onto these activist bodies. But then as the onlooker in the back of these photos hints to us, this kissin demonstration was not completely serious or somber in tone. Pleasure and joy are salient features of the demonstration, and we can notice the visionary qualities of protest that demonstrate longings for liberatory futures. We can see the kissins as moments of performing utopia and of showing us how utopia is a psychic longing on one hand, but also how utopia may be something that we can embody. Munoz writes, "Utopia lets us imagine a space outside of heteronormativity. It permits us to conceptualize new worlds and realities that are not irrevocably constrained by the HIV/AIDS pandemic and institutionalized state homophobia. More important, utopia offers us a critique of the present, of what is, by casting a picture of what can and perhaps will be." And then there's so many other places I can see my future work going. The one I'm especially interested in thinking more on, in this particular moment, is how to implement more opportunities for pleasure within social movements, and moving beyond this framework of social activism work as something that depletes us as opposed to something that fills us further, and thinking more about visions of utopia and liberation as well. And then, so after 1 or 2 gap years spent working, I want to eventually go back to grad school to get a master's in social work and a master's in queer of color critique, so that I can eventually go into counseling and critical education type work, focusing especially on holding space for healing and learning for queer and trans youth of color. And then from there, I'll see what I want to do next. So thank you. Yeah.
This was very moving. When you approached that video archive, what did you feel were the limits of interacting with this history and these people through that kind of archive?
The biggest one I encountered was, because it's recent history, watching the videos, and like I had this very particular moment where they gave me this form where I had to sign that I would, if I recognized people in the video, I'd ask them if I could use them in the photographs. And then in that moment, like when I signed that form, I realized that I had no way of knowing who was live and who had passed. And that very haunting like feeling about the archive and watching people and not being able to tell like where they are now or if they are alive or not was, I think, it felt like a big limitation to me. And it felt like I had to, I think for me that was just like the biggest one, like trying to approach that and like my own like emotional reaction to that and figuring out how I was going to like discuss this important history without like speaking for people who can like just putting words in people's mouths basically and focusing more so like on interpretation than like assuming people's kinds of intentions with the work that they were doing. Thank you.
Our next presenter, Mariel Burt, is the recipient of the Helen Terry Macleod Research Grant this year.
Hello. Is that working properly? Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you all again for being here. I'm Mariel Burt, and I'm a senior concentrator in gender and sexuality studies with a focus on performance. Before I begin, I want to thank all of the Pembroke Center associates for your generous support of my project, all of my mentors throughout the process, the cast and team that helped make my project possible, and the class of gender and sexuality studies concentrators who informed my approach to the work. My project is called Alienating Power, Rethinking Frameworks of Consent in Directing Psychopsychotic. So my project revolved around my direction of a new play, Psychopsychotic, last fall, which investigates the horror of normalized misogyny in the lens of Ivy League dating culture. It asks questions such as, how do university policies normalize toxic masculinity? How do everyday instances of sexism contribute to gendered violence? And how can liberal discourse be used to cloak toxic behavior? The play deals with alienation, which is a technique coined by Bertolt Brecht, who's a 20th century theater practitioner, which seeks to offer a representation of something, but somehow dislocate it or create a strange way of looking at it on stage in order for audiences to think critically about how it's and why it's presented in that particular way. So this led me to my title, Alienating Power, because power is central both to the themes of the text, but also became really important to me as a director in terms of critiquing my own approach to this work and critiquing how viewers were invited to engage with the performers on stage, particularly given moments of intimacy and violence that we were staging. And finally, thinking critically about the power of this particular story and given the personal and I think tense material that it deals with, trying to imagine how we might offer this as one piece of a broader conversation around toxic masculinity and rape culture on college campuses. So first, I'll speak a little bit about the questions I was asking around power as a director. So in my approach to staging intimate moments, I was using a framework created by Alicia Rodas, who's an intimacy choreographer. She uses these sort of 5 C's as the basis for her framework: context, conversation, consent, choreography, and closure. So sort of through this framework, I sought to create space for the actors I was working with to have agency over their bodies in these very challenging scenes that we were staging. But what was exciting was that this framework also allowed a way of kind of looking at power laterally, wherein everyone in the room had a very particular role to play, but no one was in full control of how the scene would be staged. So we used this same framework also for staging moments of violence and honestly throughout really all of our scene work. The second way I was thinking about power was in terms of spectatorship. So as I mentioned, we were dealing with this idea of alienation, and that took on three forms in this play. First was the notion of gender alienated casting. So there's a character in the play who's a male college student who we see committing violences against two women he interacts with. But this character was actually cast as a female actress. And the idea here was to try to draw attention to the performativity of toxic masculinity, and in particular, the toxic masculinity that is so normalized when performed by cis men. I was dealing with an idea Carol Clover talks about, who's a film theorist, that, hang on, let me find my quote here, I lost my place. A figure is not a psycho killer because he is a man, but he is a man because he is a psycho killer. So sort of thinking about how masculinity is so often actually signaled through violence. Second was the idea of the empowered gaze. So there were many moments where the performers were invited to look back at the spectators as a way of challenging them to think critically about how and why they were viewing their bodies in a particular lens at that particular moment. And third, sort of dovetailing off of this idea of the gaze, was playing with how film might change the way that viewers were engaging with the performance. There were moments when the performers were actually watching footage of themselves on stage in order to draw attention to this question of gaze and viewership and power, and to position the spectators actually as onlookers to another type of onlooking. Finally, I was thinking about, again, this idea of trying to broaden the conversation that this play presents, and community dialogue was really central to that goal. That took on three forms. First, through talkbacks, where we invited audiences to engage critically with the work, to ask questions about what was presented and why, and to share their personal responses to it. Second was through accumulated responses on papers that we put around the performance space, where we invited people to also write questions and responses to different moments in the piece. And finally, I created something called the Everyday Misogyny Story Project, wherein I invited Brown students and faculty members to write out handwritten stories of experiences with misogyny on campus, which we then hung outside of their performance space, and also invited audience members to contribute to after seeing the show as a way of putting this performance in constellation with all of these other personal stories. So I'll end on a quote from the performance artist and playwright Taylor Mack. Craft is essentially a commitment to learning the past, living in the present, and dreaming the culture forward. And I finish with this quote here because I believe that art and performance, particularly that deals with challenging social issues, but is also able to interrogate how and why it is asking particular questions. It's a really important mechanism for dreaming our culture forward and building a better world. Thank you.
What the benefit was of casting the toxic misogynist male with a female. Can you explain that again?
Certainly. Yeah, so I think there's a couple different things going on in that casting choice. The first is that many of the scenes are quite intense, and I think it was productive in order to remind the audience that this is a performance, that this particular version of a normalized violence of men controlling women's bodies is rendered dislocated. And it was a way of reminding the viewers that you're watching something that is constructed and is not a recreation of this particular violence, but rather a representation of it. And also, I think, it allowed us to try to get specific in terms of crafting that performance about, like, what are all the different sort of small gestural ways of taking up space and being that allows us as viewers to sort of like recognize something as masculine. And I think by really interrogating that in the process, we also started to think about how that is often conflated with power. I will say, I think that I, after like finishing the project, still feel complicated about that choice, particularly in terms of it rests on the assumption of a sort of like cisgendered performer, and that the audience is like understanding that in order to understand that dislocation. So it was an important, I think, learning experience for me as a director to try to engage with that type of thinking. But if I were to continue to think about how we might deal with this notion of alienated gender casting in the future. I'd be more interested in expanding many different bodies in a performance and expanding many different types of genders that they might take on, because I think that would allow a little bit more nuance in how that representation was working. Does that make sense?
I was so interested that you invited conversation,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm wondering whether you moderated that in any way, what kind of came out of it. Was it surprising or what you expected?
Yeah, the conversations were very fascinating. I was also working with SAPE, which is a sort of student sex ed program at Brown. So it was great to sort of I was one of the moderators kind of talking more about the artistic side of the project, but then also had people who were there just to kind of think through this content that was really challenging. And I think it was really productive in particular because this was a new work. So the script was actually still in development throughout the process and is still also being workshopped now. So it was really exciting to invite people to say, hey, this piece isn't perfect. I'm not offering this as a final or completed work of art, but rather one that I'm really interested in growing forward. And so it was exciting to have people come in and actually offer critique and be excited to hear that. But I think it was also challenging because oftentimes people had opposing reactions to what was happening. So I think that also just speaks to the challenge of dealing with a hot button social issue like this, as that people will have many different thoughts about how and why it should be presented.
Thank you so much. This was really, really fascinating, and I learned a lot. As an administrator at the trade school, would you do this at other institutions? Have you considered, or are you thinking of performing it beyond realms?
So the piece is written by my friend who just graduated from Yale, and I think that she is hoping to continue to try to have it produced. I would say that these are questions that I hope to continue asking, but I don't feel the need to take this particular play forward because I think it asks so many important questions, but there's a lot that I still, as a director, am wanting it to be able to say and do that I don't know that it fully completes yet.
Great, thank you.
Thanks so much.
Okay. Great. So our next presenter is Sophie Kupets, who is the Barbara Anton, who received the Barbara Anton Internship grant this year.
Okay, is this okay, volume-wise? Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Sophie. I study history, and I'm actually just finishing my 7th semester at Brown. So the project that I'll be talking with you all about is a project that I'm very much in the process of, so I hope to use this as an opportunity to share some of the questions and things that I am currently thinking about. So thank you for being here. Professor Abdur Rahman taught me that the practice of study is also a practice of honor, of bringing people into the space. I want to thank and honor my mentors and advisors both on and off Brown's campus, including my family, my advisor, Professor Helen, Professor Owens, Professor Remensnyder and Shibusawa, the Pembroke Center Associates for your generosity, the Center for the Study of Slavery and Justice, Joshua McCulloch and Aria Serenity, and all of the communities with whom I learn, laugh, and build. Through sharing and engaging with their work, I also hope to honor William Fuller, Larry Cannon, Nelson Bostic, Gary Alston, James Long, Sam Page, who I will have the honor of meeting in a few weeks thanks to the grant I received, and the other men who participated in Prisoners Against Rape, whose names I do not know. This project is for them, and I hope that it can do their work justice. Just to quickly mention, I will be talking broadly about the issue of sexual violence, so please do what you need to take care of yourselves. In 1973, during his 9th year in prison, William Fuller had an epiphany of sorts. He recognized that many men incarcerated at the Lorton Reformatory in Lorton, Virginia, including himself, perpetrated and in some instances were victim to sexual violence, both inside and outside of the prison walls. Reflecting on this reality, William Fuller and Larry Cannon, another man incarcerated at Lorton, co-founded a peer education and support group that they entitled Prisoners Against Rape. Prisoners Against Rape worked within the prison to interrogate and address issues of sexual violence that they identified. William Fuller then wrote to the DC Rape Crisis Center, the first rape crisis center in the country, led by women of color, and they decided to form a partnership, and the women from the DC Rape Crisis Center traveled to Lorton once a week to co-lead a study group with the men. PAR turned Lorton Prison, a maximum security prison for men convicted in Washington, D.C., into a classroom, transforming a sterile room surrounded by barbed wire fences and armed guards into a school for radical thought and personal growth. And this is an image of the people in the Prisoners Against Rape study group. The archive of the prison, however, is meant to be one of silence, where people are represented as numbers and defined by sentences. Through publishing their views on and scholarship about sexual violence in anti-carceral feminist newsletters and journals, Prisoners Against Rape interrupted the silencing of the prison. Their work has, nonetheless, been left out of the historiography, is rarely, if ever, cited, and may never have received or receive widespread recognition. Perhaps this is a testament to the violence of the prison to confine and prevent the spread of thoughts, but it ought not devalue PAR's work. So through collecting oral histories, my project strives to construct a narrative of the work of Prisoners Against Rape that centers the voices of those involved in the group. So along those lines, I'd like to read to you all a poem by the men in Prisoners Against Rape, which was published in a 1975 crime and social justice newsletter. I am the son of woman and the brother of woman. I know that this is their cause, but I feel that it is mine also. Their happiness is my happiness, their misery, my misery. The interests of the sexes are inseparably connected, and in the election of the one lies the salvation of the other. And I think that this small excerpt points to a lot of the themes of Prisoners Against Rape scholarship, and I'm interacting with their work as the nuanced scholarship that it is, and that was in many ways ahead of its time. So Prisoners Against Rape understood sexual violence as a struggle for power, not a struggle for sex, and they analyzed the ways that patriarchy, racism, and capitalism were all at the root of such violence. Through their scholarship and work, they answered the call of Audre Lorde and the Combahee River Collective for Black men to recognize that their interests were tied to the liberation of Black women, and really took a approach that centered coalition building, as exemplified by their work with the DC Rape Crisis Center. Loretta Ross, who was the executive director of the DC Rape Crisis Center during their partnership with Prisoners Against Rape, explains that after working with PAR, the neat angel-devil theory was no longer useful to her. Building community within and against the confines of the prison, Prisoners Against Rape work also critiqued the prison, recognizing that it did not address, but in many ways perpetrated both interpersonal and systemic sexual violence. So considering that women of color like Cece McDonald, Syntonia Brown, Renata Hill, Marissa Alexander, and many others are sentenced for decades for defending themselves against their abusers, while wealthy white cisgender men who perpetrate sexual violence receive high-powered jobs and fancy degrees, considering the failure of the Prison Rape Elimination Act of 2003 to address the issue of prison rape, considering that Black women are the fastest growing population of incarcerated people today, and considering that sexual violence remains a prevalent issue even as the prison industrial complex continues to expand, PAR's words that courts serve neither the victim nor the offender are just as, if not more relevant today than they were 45 years ago. Thank you.
Thank you. That was wonderful. Do you know whether the movement has any kind of connection, for instance, to degree earning, courses? In other words, other academic classes.
So I think, thank you, that's a really interesting question. And another reason that I was interested in this project is I do work surrounding education in prisons today and advocating for Brown to implement a 4-credit program at the Rhode Island Adult Correctional Institute, which is Rhode Island's prison. Prisoners Against Rape, the structure of the prison and prison education was a bit different about 40 years ago than it is today. Pell Grants were still able to be used for courses in prison. They're not anymore, although Obama did implement kind of a pilot program to reintroduce Pell Grants potentially. I think their group, to my understanding, was more of a peer-led and run study group that was not affiliated with any accredited institutions. So it wasn't for credit as much as it was for critical self-reflection and dialogue. Though the Lorton prison did have a partnership with an institution in DC, I'm forgetting the exact one, to have credit courses at the same time, and they actually had a furlough program, so a lot of the men incarcerated at Lorton were able to go out on furlough to the schools and take classes on the outside, which we unfortunately do not really see happening today. Yeah.
As you know, Lorton has been closed.
Yes.
Do you know what's happened to the program and the people? Has it, would a benefit of Lorton's having closed mean that this program is now in more than one place?
So yeah, Lorton closed around 2001, I think, due to overcrowding and just it being a very violent place with horrible conditions, et cetera. One of the things that I'm asking with this project is what happened to prisoners against rape. I've found writing from members of the group up until the early 80s, but do not know what happened after that. So in a couple weeks, actually, I'm going to the DC area to meet with Sam Page, who was one of the original founders of the group. He's been out of prison for about 20 years now, so I'm hoping that through talking to him and continuing this project, I can start to answer some of those questions. I know that some of the people who were incarcerated at Lorton were then transferred to other prisons when the prison closed, while some had been out or got out around that time. And from my understanding, the majority of folks who were in this group were at Lorton, although there were, when people got transferred from Lorton, sometimes they took the work that they were doing and brought it elsewhere. But questions that I hope to find out. Thank you.
I love this project. I'm reminded of Regina Kunzel's work on primarily white men prisoners who used really homophobic language around rape to defend themselves against a kind of idea of a black rapist in the prison. I'm wondering whether or not PAR took up some of this discourse, like how do you know what I mean? The sort of same-sex dimension within prisons.
Thank you for that question. And I would love to get the name because I'm not yet familiar with that work and want to look into it, which is great. So if anybody else has recommendations, considering I'm still in this process, I would love to hear it. But one thing that I'm grappling with and thinking about is their language surrounding what they term as homosexual rape, and they have a lot of rhetoric about the fact that in their words, in Williams Fuller words, on the outside I raped women and on the inside I raped men, and they term it as forced homosexuality, and there was not room in their conversation about some of the men who, and they use the language of men as well, which doesn't leave room for non-binary folks that were definitely at the prison at the time, but probably didn't have room to express that because of the confines of the prison. But there also isn't room in their framework for men who may have chosen to sleep with men or have sexual relations with men. So I'm kind of parsing out the toxic environment of the toxic masculine environment of the prison that confined a lot of these conversations and how rape was a way to, in many ways, show dominance and masculinity. So thank you. Thank you so much.
Our final presentation today will be by Alex Burnett, who is the winner of this year's Ruth Simmons Prize, which is a prize given for the best honors thesis in gender and women's studies. It's a campus-wide prize that's given each year that was started by the former president of Brown, Ruth Simmons.
Thank you all for coming. I also might speak quickly because I'm trying to get through a lot of stuff and I won't do everything in my project justice in the amount of time I have. So if you need me to speak more slowly, or if you need me to speak more slowly, feel free to raise your hand. And definitely afterwards, I welcome questions because there's no way, I wrote about a lot of things and there's no way I'm going to be able to get through all of this in the next 5 or so minutes. So to begin, my name is Alex Burnett, and my history honors thesis is entitled Fighting Homophobia During the War on Crime, the Rise of Pro-Gay, Pro-Police Liberalism in Los Angeles between 1967 and 1980. And before delivering my presentation, I want to thank Professor Nick Ramos for advising my thesis, the Pembroke Center Associates for funding the Ruth Simmons Prize, Professor Drew Walker for providing invaluable feedback on my writing, Professor Naoko Shibusawa, Julissa Bautista, the Brown History Department, and the UTRA Selection Committee for funding my archival research, and my friends and family who are in the audience today. This thesis was not just me. This was incredibly, I received an incredible amount of support, and I could not have done this without all of you. So thank you so much. So that's how you change slides. Okay, found that out. Okay, great. So to begin, my thesis explores how pro-gay demands for law and order gained popularity among primarily white, gay, and liberal political leaders in Los Angeles during the 1960s and 70s, which were decades marked by intensely racialized fear of urban rebellion, inner-city crime, and working-class sexual, quote, pathology. And between 1967 and 1980, I argued that a new coalition of gay elites and liberal politicians framed gay social life as economically productive, psychologically, quote, healthy, non-disruptive, and putatively white in order to differentiate a respectable class of gay Angelenos from their criminalized and racialized peers. Buoyed by citizen pressure to abate LA's perceived rising crime rate, these leaders popularized the idea that the LAPD should redirect policing towards working-class people of color, working-class gender nonconforming people, and street-based sex workers, but reduce the policing of white middle-class gay citizens who these leaders claimed could, quote, help fight urban crime. And there's an overview of my chapters and some of the slides we're going to be talking about today. So specifically, I examined two influential gay nonprofit organizations, the Homophile Effort for Legal Protection, also known as HELP, and the Gay and Lesbian Services Center, also known as the GLSC. And through their extensive electoral organizing, legal advocacy, and frequent political commentary, HELP and the GLSC helped naturalize the idea that policing white gay communities wasted, quote, valuable police resources that would be better spent targeting supposedly, quote, dangerous neighborhoods of color. A January 1973 HELP newsletter article, which argued that the LAPD should heavily police Echo Park, which was a working-class Mexican neighborhood in LA, in order to, quote, protect law-abiding homosexuals, exemplified the kind of pro-gay, pro-police rhetoric that I found in the archive, which this project was really trying to explain where this kind of rhetoric comes from, its impact, and sort of how it, sort of the political context in which it operated. And I also have some photos of HELP and the GLS, some of the stuff, the materials that HELP and the GLSC produced there, and a little bit of information about them. But in the interest of time, we're going to move on. So to understand the political climate in which HELP and the GLSC operated, I contextualized their actions with two key events: the 1965 Watts Uprising, which was a black-led urban rebellion, and the 1967 Black Cat Rebellion, which was a gay anti-police uprising. And to explain these nationally publicized instances of, quote, urban disorder, the LAPD really redoubled their effort in the late 1960s to frame black and gay Angelenos as, quote, violent and responsible for LA's perceived uptick in crime. And so some social scientists, such as Labor Secretary Daniel Patrick Moynihan, really affirmed the LAPD's racialized sexual policing by linking criminality with blackness and, quote, sexual deviance. Others, most notably Dr. Evelyn Hooker, offered a slightly different interpretation. And Hooker was a prominent UCLA psychiatrist who clearly delineated between, quote, healthy and criminalized forms of homosexuality, arguing against the LAPD's harassment of middle-class gay Angelenos, but openly advocating for the criminalization of drag queens, working-class gender nonconforming people, and street-based sex workers, who Hooker claimed allegedly, quote, lowered property values, disproportionately committed, quote, violent crimes, and therefore deserved removal from LA city streets. So as you can see, a lot of this politics are entwined with the issues of racial capitalism, with property values, and sort of with the changing fate of cities in the mid-20th century. So then, additionally, I sort of argue how these activists, how this pro-gay, pro-police rhetoric I trace found expression in state policy thanks to Burt Pines, who is a former federal prosecutor who was elected to LA's city council in May 1973 with HELP and the GLSC's vocal support. And though he's really often remembered by historians and activists as this, quote, progressive prosecutor, I demonstrate that Pines radically escalated the LAPD's war on crime and war on prostitution, both of which harmed LGBT Angelenos who fell outside of the racial, class, and gender norms of healthy homosexuality. I wish I could go more in detail to Pines today because he's really the kind of institutional embodiment of this rhetoric that I trace. And finally, I examined leftist critics, including Sir Lady Java, the Transsexual Action Organization, and Women Behind Cages, who critiqued the idea that expanded policing could bring gay safety, which is really the stuff that Pines was really implementing. This is an ideology I call pro-gay, pro-police liberalism, hence the title. And by framing prisons as socially unnecessary institutions used to mask inequality, these radicals challenged the idea that the carceral state could meaningfully protect all LGBT Angelenos. Again, I wish I had more time to discuss that in this presentation today. Feel free to ask me any questions about their important work, because that's a large part of my thesis. And so I want to conclude today by talking about some of the implications of my argument, some three main ones I want to emphasize today. First, my thesis demonstrates the necessity of analyzing LA's gay police reform movement from the vantage point of the urban crisis and the war on crime. This context is absolutely crucial for understanding how and why some members of LA's gay rights movement actively supported, quote, tough anti-crime policies. And second, my thesis shows that visibility was not the only political strategy pursued by LGBT activists, even during the vocal gay liberation era of the early 1970s. While some LGBT Angelenos, like the Transsexual Action Organization, loudly demanded an end to prisons and policing, others, like HELP, sort of more quietly fought for inclusion into law and order America. And third, my thesis shows that alternatives to pro-gay, pro-police liberalism existed even as this harmful ideology was being institutionalized in LA. And as people currently living in an era of aggressive hate crime legislation and debates about, quote, including trans people into the US military, we should remember these radicals' cogent critiques of the militarized carceral state. So thank you so much, and I look forward to answering any questions. I used a lot of archives. I was very lucky to get funding from the Brown History Department and for the UTRA committee to go to LA for 3 weeks. I looked at the One National Gay and Lesbian Archive at USC, the USC Library Special Collections, UCLA Special Collections. I also went to the California Library for Social Studies and Research. I spoke with Norma Jean Almarondo, who's a sex worker rights activist in LA, and I looked through her collections, and I spent a lot of time on Google. And through Brown has some archives too of like the LA Times, like the LA Sentinel, so I was like obsessively reading that stuff for a year and a half. Oh yeah.
Hi. So I'm just curious, when you're talking about HELP, about the activists, did you find that were they like predominantly male spaces, or were they alliances of gay and lesbian upper middle class?
Yes. HELP was very much primarily male, and this is something that I delve into more in my thesis. They were but they were not exclusively. They were primarily middle class and upper middle class white men. There were very much like not just men involved with them. In terms of the GLSC was the other group that I discussed, and they were more diverse in terms of gender, in terms of race, in terms of class. However, their leadership, sort of post-1975, there was a mass exodus of women, of people of color, and leftists from the organization because there was this big strike because they sort of started to align more with the incipient war on crime, and then a lot of people very much like took issue with that, and then the organization became much more white, much more male, and much more conservative, sort of post-1975. Yeah. Mm.
This is a question maybe impossible to answer, but what do these kinds of conflicts between different groups do to the politics of Los Angeles?
Yeah, so that was one thing also in my thesis I emphasized more. Really, sort of in the early 1970s, there was really sort of one thing I sort of tried to emphasize, but sort of before kind of 1970s, like sort of LGBT folks in LA were like experienced some of the incredibly intense policing, and that was like this major issue that a lot of these sex crime reform efforts were trying to address. But sort of kind of in the early 1970s, some LGBT folks really did some, especially like HELP and the GLSC did really intense like electoral organizing. So they eventually organized like this massive municipal block that could really influence elections. And there was this one big election I talk about. It was the 1969 election, I believe, of blanking on the name right now, but it was this congressman who was like this very homophobic congressman who had been in office for 20 years. And the GLSC helped, even though it actually was the Advocate and the LA Free Press mobilized tons of people, and they absuaded this congressman. So sort of this sort of municipal the sort of politicians realized that they needed to sort of court quote the gay vote because it became a very like big municipal block. Sort of my thesis kind of, and a lot of historians sort of just like stop there with that. My thesis kind of interrogates like, but which gay people were sort of gaining that kind of municipal electoral organizing, and sort of what I found was that it was often like overwhelmingly white, overwhelmingly male, and overwhelmingly middle class. So oftentimes politicians would come and talk to these groups, and they would sort of promise, like, we're going to like reform sex crime laws, we're going to make the LAPD stop targeting, white middle class gay bars as much. But they would also say, we're going to do this because it would be more efficient if the LAPD was escalating the war on crime. And this is wasting, valuable police resources that are really needed at the time. And that was something I didn't see represented in historical literature. It was very much this sort of heroic narrative, which I think there's benefits to that heroic narrative, but for me, this project was sort of trying to square up what I was finding in the archive with what I was reading in the literature. Does anyone have any other questions? Thank you so much.
Okay, that concludes our presentations, and thanks again to the students. Those were wonderful presentations. I think they give you, as we do every year, a great sense of the work that we're supporting at the Pembroke Center, and also just how amazing the students at Brown are, so congratulations again. I want to thank you all for joining us. I also want to note that the Pembroke Center and the Pembroke Center Associates are sponsoring what will be a really great commencement forum tomorrow at 11 a.m., featuring some really dynamite Brown alumni in media and entertainment. Please come if you can. More details are in the commencement brochure and app, or you can pick up a flyer on the first floor. Diane's showing it off back there in the back. The program's called Voices Carry. At this time, we ask the Associates Council and staff to please head down to the second floor as soon as we can to continue with our business meeting. Everyone else feel free to stay and talk, visit. There's desserts on the table. And again, thank you so much for coming today.